Welcome to BitLyft. I'm Casey, and today we're talking about EDR, or Extended Detection and Response. As a relative newcomer to the cybersecurity world, XDR might bear some explaining. Luckily, we have the expertise to help with BitLyft founder and CEO Jason Miller and our director of SOC, Mike Skeeth. Thanks, guys, for coming on.
Absolutely.
Jason, let's start with you. What is XDR, and how does it differ from the other DRs like MDR, EDR, and NDR?
Yeah, so XDR is the culmination of network detection and response, endpoint detection and response. Really, everything that you would want to be able to do detection and response against falls into that X category. So it is the culmination or the inclusion of all of the methods that you would want to detect from. Application layer, network layer, your firewalls, your SaaSes, your email. It is really an all-encompassing detection and response. That's why they have called it, and we don't know who they are. We're still trying to find they. But we, I guess, as a market, are calling it XDR simply because from our perspective, we are trying to capture all logs, all things that would provide detection methodologies, and run that through a system that allows us to do detection and response against those types of threats.
Yeah, sounds like it's not just extended, but it's also extreme.
Yes, it's very extreme.
So I like where that X fits in, which is perfect. Mike, your job is pretty simple, but pretty complex. Explain to us how XDR works.
Explain to me first how it's simple.
Your job?
That's what you're here. That's what you're here to do.
All right. So, one thing that we see in the confusion in these DR spaces is XDR does not replace your EDR, MDR, NDR. It enhances, it uses all of those to stitch more things together to have a global view of all of those tools. So, for instance, if you have a quality EDR, we could put a few names there, but I won't for this space. But if you had one already, you're already getting a lot of metrics and telemetry with that EDR product. You don't also need to duplicate that or reinvent the wheel in your XDR. Your XDR can come along and only do a couple nuanced pieces better with the telemetry that you're getting out of your EDR. But that's just one example. So how does it work? Again, it brings all that data together. It gives you a better representation. Sometimes the simplicity of it is just your executive team wants a better report. It wants not to stitch together a bunch of PDF reports, but for you to provide them one single export of how is this thing working? Is it on? Is it tracking all of our issues? Are we getting them resolved? And that's where the XDR stitches everything together at a simpler interface.
Oh, well, it's a pretty good explanation. So now that we kind of know what it is and how it works, guys, what would you say somebody should be looking for in an XDR solution, and how might that work with the other security products that you have in your stack?
I would emphasize integration to your EDR, integration to your firewalls, integration to your SaaS applications or your AWS or your Microsoft Azure, your Office 365. You want to make sure that the XDR product that you're maybe looking at or the XDR company has solid integration, and go one step further. There's always the do you integrate, and then the quick answer is yes. It's always about like where and how is it integrating and what is it integrating. Because, I'll make an assumption, and Mike, you can sort of elaborate on this, but one of the major focuses that we do in BitLyft is we want to understand what data are we going to correlate against, right? And that is a big differentiator in the space, because it's not that just it integrates and we check the box yes. It's like, what security context data are we going to look at with that product? And are we going to ingest? What metadata is important for us to do data correlation from the endpoint data correlation on the firewall and the network in the Office 365 or Google Gmail and look at email, right? So data correlation is extremely important, and integration there is probably the key. The other thing that I would say is quality of information, quality of data. You don't want just more white noise, in the system. You want actionable data that is going to help you move towards resolution, remediation, and maybe even educating you and your team on how to prevent future attacks from happening similarly to what you're seeing in that system.
Mike, what do you have to add on that?
Yeah, sometimes that data is just there to validate that we have gaps to cover still, and to go back to the company and say, hey, we need to implement a solution that fills this gap. The other piece that I wanted to mention, as Jason was talking about integration, is today, right now, we have so many SaaS solutions in the market. Next year, there's going to be a handful that are better than what we're using today. So how do we talk about the integration of things that don't exist yet? And that's the team behind the XDR products. How quick are they able to build in a new source, a new ingestion, to get you the visibility in that new product? So first, we got to make sure that product has the correct API capabilities, probably, or logging capabilities, so that a team like BitLyft does regularly is able to go out and create new ingestions for new products that exist in the market.
And I would even take that one more step further. So as we're looking at products and evaluating them, Mike, we have this conversation often, whereas we look at this as a life cycle. You look at a log source. Let's just take Office 365 for a moment, simply because phishing leads to account compromise, and account compromise often leads to some sort of malware getting spread in the environment, and then maybe even ransomware, right? You can't just focus on ransomware, because oftentimes there's baby steps that lead up to the ransomware event. So you need to understand those and how those take place. But so if you take that log source for a moment, it's one thing to ingest the logs or to ingest that data, whether it's syslog or some other type of format. But then there's the ability to integrate and speak back to that log source so that you can do some sort of remediation step, right? So Office 365, when you look at that log source, there's five log sources, right, that we ingest out of that today, right? So when you look at those 5 different log sources underneath that one brand, you also want to look at how am I going to be able to speak back to that log source and help with automated incident response. Because if you factor in dwell time in the environment, and that is really where XDR in our definition of XDR, it's not only good enough, it's not good enough to just ingest data and not be able to look at the full life cycle and not be able to respond and remediate and to stop that threat actor, right? So that's my thoughts and what we've talked about a lot, and that's what's in our platform. But if you're out looking in the space and you're wanting to completely understand XDR, and if a company or a product or a tool is only talking about the first part of the life cycle, which is ingestion, they're missing out on the other 50% of the life cycle of what's happening there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up life cycle on this, Jason, because it seems in the cybersecurity industry with 450,000 open jobs and companies struggling.
I think it's 460,000.
It continues to grow every day.
Yeah.
But that is exactly the point we're trying to make here. Is it's becoming increasingly difficult in the landscape to deal with things as a small team. So I guess the question really begs, is XDR one of the best solutions out there for a small security team that's dealing with endless alarms and staffing shortages and budget constraints? And what are maybe some of the top ways that XDR solves solutions for a small SOC or security team?
There was a lot of questions there.
I think the biggest one we can really hunker down on here is what are some of the top ways that XDR addresses challenges within the SOC?
Yeah. Or a non-existent SOC.
Yeah, or just the security team in general that you might have at your organization.
Yeah. So I would say that XDR really is aimed at that small, let's say that IT team that is striped with the responsibility of IT operations and keeping the lights on and keeping the network healthy and the systems healthy and everything on and operational. And they're also wearing the hat of security. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to also be thinking about the security context of our company. And we see this across many organizations, right? That's what they're tasked with. If you're in IT, you're probably also in security, right? And so XDR is aimed at helping those businesses, whether you're, an organization of 50, 100, or a couple hundred, or even a couple thousand employees. XDR is meant to help you. It's meant to think about that whole life cycle of being able to monitor and manage. That M is interchangeable when you look at MDR and XDR, bringing out the actual, like, we're not only going to manage the ingestion of logs or the ability to monitor and detect threats on the network, but we're also going to think about how do we respond to them, and how do we educate that IT team, and how do we educate you to increase the posture of your cybersecurity around the organization. It's no longer about building a moat, around the organization, and we're going to protect everything inside, because today everything is so distributed. When you look at the topologies of everything today, it's so distributed. So AWS and Microsoft Azure and DigitalOcean and, all of these SaaS apps. So as the distributed architecture is going to continue to roll out over the coming years, XDR is absolutely like spot on the scene to help you address these cyber attacks and respond to them.
Right. Mike, would you say you echo that same sentiment in terms of XDR?
Yeah. The only thing I want to add is just, when you're talking about these acronyms, who's responsible for what? And I think it's still not clear to a lot of the smaller organizations that need to leverage these tools is, what do I get? What am I responsible for? What am I supposed to come to the table with? So XDR being the thing, MDR being the BitLyft. We're doing the managed detection response. So what do you bring? You bring the NDR, the EDR, the endpoint detection tool. You bring the network detection tool. And by the way, BitLyft can help kind of scope into what those should be for you if you don't have them today. And then we put them into the tools that create the XDR. That might be some SIM tooling that helps bring all the pieces together, but it helps offset a lot of the tech that a company shouldn't have to deal with to get the full picture of XDR.
Right. So it sounds like there's heavy emphasis on your tools actually being able to integrate with each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not only integrate with each other, but also make the data usable and make sense, to not only security analysts, but also to IT folks that might not spend, majority of their day inside of security tools. They might spend majority of their day inside of networking tools or other operational tools. So, that's what we see a lot across our customers and clients is that ability to understand, what is this tool telling me, right? And then how do I make sensible next steps, with this information?
Right. And we say it here in our own tagline, which is, powerful automation backed by human intervention. Mm-hmm. So I think it's safe to say that your tools are only as good as the team managing the tools.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like that's a lot of what XDR has to deal with.
Yeah. And think about as well when you're evaluating tools and you're evaluating knowledge on your team. If you're a IT professional that is focused on OSs, or you're focused on system administration or network administration, well, you spend majority of your time inside of those tools, and they're probably tweaked and tuned really, really well. They're working at a 80% to 100% rate, right? They're fully configured. You're in there managing it all day, every day. And so you'd say that these tools are configured really, really well. Well, if you don't have the tools like an XDR or a SAM, some of these other tools that go in behind the scenes that put the whole thing together, if they aren't managed that well, like in your context, like a subject matter expertise, what'll happen is the tool will start to become shelfware. It'll start to become basically degraded or eroded because it's not keeping up. Somebody's not keeping up with the constant tweaking and tuning of, the log sources and the parsing and the ability for it to detect threats that have changed vectors between last couple of months ago and today. And yes, the cybersecurity threat vectors change very, very quickly. We're changing rules all the time. And Mike, you probably can even speak to it. Rules that we wrote 6 months ago and 3 months ago are different today, right? The methods in which they vector, the methods in which the tools like Office 365 or Palo Alto or Fortinet as firewalls even report on them inside of the logs. So, as those things change, you have to have your XDR constantly tuned to be able to detect that, right?
Yeah. Well, go. You had something to add? Go ahead.
One more piece when you're looking at an XDR platform and what types of what things you should look for in it, or what differentiates it from another tool, is some of that specific context. When new threats exist, when new metadata about threats exist, how easy is it for you as an individual or as the company that's doing the MDR for you able to inject that system with those new threats to not only protect you, but protect the overall, all the companies, I guess, using those products? That's just something to really look out for, is how can you quickly adapt that new information insight into those tools?
Yeah, it could come in the form as a threat feed. It could come in the form of just a flat file. It could come in many different forms, but security analysts that, are sitting in a SOC, all day, every day, kind of looking at millions of pieces of data. And then they have tools in front of them to help sift through millions of pieces of data. They need the ability to quickly ingest threat metadata and use it quickly. Time is of the essence, right?
Yeah, it still astounds me how much of a human element there is in a digital world. And even, we play into the automated incident response a lot here ourselves, but without a team behind that, the data that we're producing and that we're ingesting is moot without the human element. So
yep.
I appreciate you guys being here again today, because you're only as good as the team operating the tool.
Yeah.
So if you guys if you're interested in more information about how we here at BitLyft are addressing cybersecurity through our own next-gen XDR, feel free to follow us, or you can visit us at bitlyft.com for all the content regarding XDR. So on behalf of myself, Mike, and Jason, we'll see you guys next time.